Hey, deserving listeners, 90 Day Fiancé. My name is Dr. Kirk Honda. I'm a therapist and a professor. As I always say, everything I say in reaction to these shows is completely speculative based on very little information. Let's watch.
I'm so hot from being in the kitchen.
चाय बनाने में गर्मी लग रही है.
Just making chai and feeling hot.
I've been in the kitchen for a while.
करना तो पड़ता ही है. कैसे हो?
ठीक हो?
ठीक हो? ऐसा मुंह से निकलता ठीक हूँ. जैसे कोई बटन दबा दिया.
Yeah, I'm not sure what the mom meant by that, but it could be taken as ridicule, as callous meanness that is unnecessary. I don't know if you caught it, but they asked her how she was doing, and in their language, she said, "I'm well," and they laughed, I think, because it was something to laugh at. But then the mom doubles down on it and says, it's funny how she just like pressing a button. I guess if we're going to be charitable to the mom, she's just kind of phrasing things in a little weird way. But if we're going to look at it in lieu of her history, in terms of her behavior, this is ridicule for no reason, bullying, and really callous behavior. And just imagine that, talking about someone right in front of your face that doesn't understand your language as you're mocking them, like directly in front of them, when you know fully well that the show is going to translate it and she'll see it later. But the mom would say these things to her face too. Wow. Now, they're editing this, so God knows what's really happening, but I don't think the sister would have laughed at that. I think they interspersed that shot. But at the very least, it sounds like the mom says, look how fat her arms are. I mean, yikes.
So how's everybody been?
I'm going to retire in the month of January.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
Sumit told me not to talk, but he's not saying anything at all. It's making me more nervous.
Yeah, I didn't show the conversation, so they were talking about prepping for the family to come over, and he said he didn't want her to talk at all. Later on, he was basically saying that he wanted things to remain calm, and I could see that to some extent. The way he was asking was not cool. He could say something like, look, I just want things to be really calm, and if you start saying things, which you're free to do, of course, but it's going to get me all discombobulated. It'll trigger my family. And I want you to, and then she's saying, well, do I even have to come? She didn't want to come. He wanted her to be there to give him strength. The way he asked, again, he could have phrased it differently, but he talks down to her. I don't know if this is a sexism thing or a him thing, or I don't know, or they're editing it. But now they sit down, and this is supposed to be when he tells the family that he is married, because presumably this is in between the tell-all and airing the tell-all, which I think there's only a couple weeks there. So the family will find out soon enough, and he wants to tell them, which is good. And he's not saying anything. He could just kind of launch into it. Now, I just want to remind, I said this a few times when we were watching before with this family. I just want to remind everyone what the quote-unquote problem is. Sumit, I'm looking at my notes here, a 33-year-old man has married a woman of his choice, someone that's very sweet, that loves him and he loves her, and that's the problem. That he has a relationship with someone and they have a good relationship. They love each other and they want to spend the rest of their lives together. That's the problem. I just want to remind everyone, everything at stake here, the complete rejection by the mother, the tens of thousands of dollars they've had to spend in order to have him get a divorce, the massive amount of emotional turmoil that this whole family, and in fact, I think the whole community has been through, because Sumit fell in love with someone and married her and wants to marry, and now he is married. It's just absurd. I mean, just imagine. So I always want to anchor things, because we're like, well, is everything up for grabs? Is everything relative? And I would say no. There are certain universals that I think we can say that are bad behavior, that are shameful behavior. It has to do with willful harm of others. If you murder someone, if you steal from them, if you lie to them, if you push them down a flight of stairs, if you talk crap about, spread lies about, these are willful harm of others, calling someone a name, this kind of intimidating someone, trying to control them. This is willful harm of other human beings. Those are, shall we call them, sins, immoral, bad behavior, shameful behavior. Yeah, there are things that we can point to, but marrying someone because it's culturally unusual, somehow you're a piece of crap and Jenny is even a worse piece of crap. Like, I wish people would just think about things. It's one thing to be like, well, this is unusual. It doesn't really fit in our tradition. I'm not very comfortable with, because, and I think I said this before, that in my neck of the woods, it wasn't that long ago, and certainly people still adhere to this, but they're a small minority, that being gay is immoral, disgusting, shameful, sinful, in fact. When you just change the way you look at it or open your eyes and think logically, and you think, well, that's ridiculous. There's no harm in that. People fall in love with who they fall in love with. Who cares? What's it to you? And that's what's happening here. He fell in love with an older woman from the United States. Who cares? No one's getting harmed. With your moralism, you are the one harming others. It is you that is harming. You are the sinner. You are the immoral person. You are the one willfully harming other people. I'm not saying she's a sinner because everyone can decide. But you know what I'm saying? It's like we have to ground ourselves in reality.
And that you weren't going to stop us if we wanted to marry, that you weren't going to stop us, and that things were going to get better.
ये भी बोल रहे हैं कि भी जो तुम्हें करना करो, हम रोकेंगे नहीं. तुम शादी करने जाते हो, शादी कर लो, ये डेस्टिनी है.
नहीं, ऐसे मैंने
आपने अपने ये मेरे को बोला है.
नहीं कहा ये.
आपने
शादी के लिए मैं ना थी राजी ना हूँ.
The mom is saying, I never said that, and I never will, when it's on camera. Now, maybe the translation was wrong, but if the translation was at least mostly right, how do you say that? It was just interesting that the mom, does the mom lie? Does the mom deceive? Is she deceitful? Did she pass that on to Sumit? Is that where he got it from in a way? I don't know, because I don't think we've seen this before. I don't think we've seen her lie, right? We've seen other kinds of behavior, but it's just, never said that. Didn't happen. It's interesting. So you just got to figure the mom went through some stuff when she was a kid to have this kind of behavior model to, I don't know.
ना रहूंगी.
They are saying that not even never said that, like, okay, we are letting you get married and we're not going to stop you.
Did say it.
अगर वैसे तुम सोचो कि दोनों शादी करके हम लोग खुश रहें, तो वो कभी नहीं हो सकता. तू करेगा ना शादी?
I don't. People will tell me there are mothers and fathers in India that will act. As a therapist, I am trained and have had a lot of experiences interfacing with people of various different cultures. In fact, just having a woman client is a cross-cultural relationship in my therapy office because I have not had the experiences of women in our society, which is a very different experience than that of me as a man. So it's frequent, it's often that this is the case. Sometimes there are clients who have cultural traditions and ideas and values that are really quite foreign. And the example that I will talk about, because one of the unfortunate things about training these days is that there's not a lot of time to train therapists, especially if they don't seek outside wisdom and instruction and experience, and especially if they come into graduate school with limited experience on the topic of culture. And so sometimes, and I will see this, white students will emerge from graduate school or be in the middle of graduate school with this notion that anything that is cultural is okay, that you're not supposed to comment on it. And it is something to consider because white Americans have a long tradition. If there's one thing about white American culture that is consistent over time is colonialism and thinking that their way of thinking is the right way of thinking, which could be happening right now. I mean, I'm half Japanese, which of course has its own tradition regarding that, which is awful. I mean, Japan was a massive colonial power for a long period of time. In fact, I have ancestors that were living not only in China, but Japanese people that were occupying citizens working in occupied China and Korea. So I have it coming both ways, as a white American, as a Japanese American. So I have to watch out for that. But, and of course, therapists also tend to do this because we're trained to think that we have some ability to analyze and conceptualize. And so there's a temptation to just impose our own thoughts on and subjectivity on other people as quote unquote objective. But one of the things that is important to recognize is that there are some cultural traditions that are not okay, that we can evaluate as maybe somewhat closer to objectively evaluating them as not okay. For example, in the United States, when you have white Americans who feel like they can go to another country and start judging everyone, that is a cultural aspect of white Americans, and that's a cultural thing, and we wouldn't say that that's okay, or that somehow it's immune to scrutiny from within or from without. In the same way that you, as a therapist from the United States, I can look at other cultures from other areas and think, well, what's going on here? It's a question mark. Am I looking at it through my biased lens and not seeing it for what it is, or is it actually harmful? For example, in my early career, this is just a year or so into my early career, 24 years ago, I had a client, a South Korean kid, American, teenager who was struggling in school and was defying rules. It wasn't that bad, but he, according to his family, was out of control. And so I was helping him and his family. And he came into session one time and told me that his family, his extended family, aunts and uncles, invited him over to their house and invited him into the garage. And when he went into the garage, they closed the garage door, and then all the men in the family proceeded to beat him for a long period of time, because this is apparently one of the ways in which, according to him, according to his culture, was acceptable. Now, I don't think it's commonplace, but physical, corporal punishment, so what we would consider to be abusive physical behavior from parents and extended family, is apparently more accepted. And when we actually look at the research, because there's a fair amount of research on this, that the attitudes in South Korea around corporal punishment is much more accepting. And, we can debate the finer points of that, but the story that I heard from my client about him being ruthlessly beaten and emotionally rejected, just imagine that your whole family conspires for a long time, maybe a week, they're talking, maybe longer. Okay, on this date, we're going to invite him over. We're going to beat him and bruise him and humiliate him and reject him in a systematic way. And we're all going to know, not only these men, but all the rest of the family, that they all knew what was going to happen. They all approved of it. The parents signed off on it. And I heard this and went through that thought process of like, what? That's horrible. That's a CPS call, which I did. But, I was like, should I call CPS? Is this a cultural thing? Am I colonializing this family because of my morals and my values, so to speak? Or what's going on here? Of course, I consulted and talked with other South Korean Americans, and they told me that, well, this is common, but it doesn't mean that it's okay. So along those lines, when we look at this cultural practice, which from my understanding is common enough, like I was saying earlier, it is something that people are progressing away from. There are changes, but certainly there's still a lot of this kind of attitude and behavior from parents. But what do we think of it? Do we look at it and just knee-jerk reaction and say these parents are horrific, psychopathic human beings, liars, cruel, abusive? Or do we look on the other side and say, well, this is what they're taught. This is what everyone around them might be doing in their community. This is what responsible parenting looks like. In the same way that in South Korea, it might be considered responsible parenting to beat your children when they get an F, when they're being defiant and when they're getting Fs in their grades in school. It's considered responsible to do this sort of thing. To make it more relatable, if you come from a cultural pocket like mine regarding parenting values, it wouldn't be uncommon, say, for a kid who got all Fs, flunked all of his classes and was caught smoking weed at school and ran away. It wouldn't be uncommon for the parents to say, we're going to take away your car keys, we're going to take away your phone, we're going to ground you for the next month, and you can't leave the house to hang out with your friends or anything until you get your grades up and until you can prove that you can be responsible, this kind of thing. That wouldn't be uncommon. But for some of you actually listening, and you might be able to imagine some people, they might actually look at you the same way that I might look at them. They might look at you as a parent who is grounding your child for that kind of behavior and that kind of problem as abusive, as someone who is extreme, too disciplinarian, authoritarian, if you will. So it's relative, right? So am I looking at them? Are we looking at them in that biased way? And I don't know. You can tell me what you think, but after watching this for a number of seasons and thinking about it, and of course, these aren't my clients, so if they were, I would be thinking much more about it and consulting a lot more about it, having a lot more conversations. If I had the mom in my office, I would really try to understand, where is this coming from? Like, is this an act of love? Is there another way? What are you worried about? What's the value system here? What does this really mean when you say these things? Do you mean you're actually going to actively try to harm Jenny, or is this just something you say? Because that's another thing to think about, is that the parents, particularly the mom, know that this is going to be watched on TV, and maybe other people in India are watching this, maybe even her friends and family. Maybe she feels like she has to say this in order to uphold the family honor, whereas in her heart, she doesn't really care. I don't really believe that. I think in her heart, she is actually holding back to some extent. But what do I know? But yeah, so my opinion, based on the limited information before me and people writing in and commenting, that this isn't okay. I think I said before that it'd be one thing for you to think, I'm just not comfortable with my son marrying an older woman. She's too old to have kids. It doesn't look right. It's strange. I always had a different vision for him. I get that he didn't want to be married to his wife, but can't he get married to someone his age? I mean, it's important to have kids. And I think he's delusional that he won't want to have kids. I think he really does want to have kids. I think he wants to have a family and grandkids. I mean, that's the purpose of life. And so I want that for him. And I think, he's always been a little weird. And I feel like in 5 years, he's really going to regret this. So I feel like I'm saving him. You could come from that place and say those kinds of things without being ridiculing. I mean, just the repeated, I'm reminded of the other times when she was just talking in her language about her as Jenny's trying to clean up. And the whole time I'm thinking, oh no, you do not come over to my house. I don't care who you are in my family, and tell me how to clean my own house and tell me that I must clean in this way, or that I'm a terrible human in my own. You don't do that. You can get the hell out of my house. One, my house is pretty clean. Two, screw you. Let's go over to your house and see. Anyway, I don't care who you are. And I guess in certain cultures but I don't know. The dad doesn't do this. The dad doesn't do this. The mom does it. And I can't imagine that all moms are like her in India. In fact, I seem to remember people saying as much. So actually, I'm reminded of where I landed, I think, which was that the place she's coming from, the kind of verbatim of the principles that she is espousing are cultural and understandable, and maybe I could be convinced, but the way she is implementing them, that she is so rigid, that she's lying, that she won't give. Everyone's telling her, I think a lot of people are like, well, yeah, we get it, but will you calm down? And the astrologer, I think the dad has also tried, but I'm also reminded of my hypothesis that the dad knows the mom has extreme. Oh, actually, I'm remembering. So Sumit was saying that when he was young, I think it was Sumit was saying that the mom would have very exaggerated emotional reactivity. And the dad sat Sumit down and said, you can't be normal around your mom. You have to lie. I think the dad told Sumit essentially that Sumit had to lie. Yeah, I'm reminded of that. So the dad could be sitting here internally saying why are we doing this? But on the outside, he is so scared of her reactivity and punishment of the dad, because it sounded like the dad was getting a lot of the emotional punishment in the early part of this family. And so Sumit might even be, and I think I even hypothesized, if I didn't, I should say, that Sumit might actually be elected by this family system to oppose the mom because no one else will, in a very obvious way, by doing what she would hate, by marrying someone. You know, a classic example of this in the United States is you have a white girl daughter who is trying to passively get back at her parents and will date someone of a different ethnicity as a way of passively trying to piss off one's parents. I don't know how often that happens, but that's a trope that people will mention along these lines. So, I mean, I think Sumit genuinely loves Jenny, don't get me wrong, but maybe the beginning of the relationship was motivated by that. But anyway, so yeah, I'm slowly reminding myself of all those aspects. But yeah, I don't understand why the mom has to dig in for I mean, we're talking 10 years now.
मरते दम तक नहीं कह सकती मैं कि तू शादी कर ले इससे।
और आपने बोला था कि भैया हम नहीं आएंगे।
दिखा मेरे को, अभी सबूत दिखा मेरे को, अभी दिखा।
फिर आपको बताओ, मैं तो शादी भी कर चुका हूँ।
Okay, so the mom mentioned not on my deathbed. I don't know if that's sort of a ramping up to the threats of harming herself that she is trying to lay the groundwork for.
शक्ल मत दिखा दियो कभी जिंदगी में। अगर मेरे दरवाजे पे तू आ गया, इतनी बेइज्जती करके भगाऊंगी तेरे को।
क्यों?
बिल्कुल नहीं।
क्यों?
नहीं।
शांति से बात।
यार नहीं।
So interesting that the dad is saying, calm down, be respectful. And we hear the mom saying, you're dead to me. If you ever show up at my house, I will insult you and kick you out. How could you do this to me? So it just makes me think that the mom has a lot of traumas, a lot of issues, maybe being abused growing up, something that's going on that makes her latch on to a cultural notion in a very odd and rigid, harmful way to herself. I mean, just think about if you're her. She's probably the primary one suffering from her own ideas about things. That, because for the son, he'll suffer, Sumit will suffer, but he'll move on in life. For her, she's going to just stew in this, and the sadness and pain, the terribleness. I mean, just, ugh.
अगर मेरे दरवाजे पे तू आ गया, इतनी बेइज्जती करके भगाऊंगी तेरे को।
क्यों?
बिल्कुल नहीं।
क्यों?
नहीं।
शांति से बात।
यार नहीं, ऐसे कैसे कर सकता है ये?
कैसे मम्मी आप
कैसे कर सकता है ये शादी?
अरे मम्मी।
नहीं ना, कैसे कर सकता है ये?
Yeah, when I see that, I'm reminded of other moments like this where it's either some kind of histrionic drumming up of drama, or it actually is touching on something for her, that this is somehow triggering to some betrayal trauma of some sort, some kind of, I don't know, did her dad cheat on the mom, or did her dad abandon her for another woman, or I don't know, you just wonder, like, what is being displaced here? What's being transferred? Because it's not rational. You know, I would understand if the dad was also breaking down. I would think, oh, well, maybe the cultural lens they see this through, it's devastating. But it just, the emotional vibe of it, it just feels like this is so much more than what's really happening in the room for the mom. All right, well, we have merch. If you want to get merch, t-shirts and mugs and other kinds, posters, that kind of stuff, we are always adding new things, so check it out if you want to. Also, I'm on Cameo if you want me to give someone a birthday shout out or a happy anniversary or maybe a mild pep talk. I can't provide therapy over Cameo, of course, so you want to keep it to easy pep talks, general pep talks, I suppose. But I always like doing those kinds of things. There's usually about one every other day, and it's a little highlight. And anyway, everyone out there, please take care of yourself because you deserve it. You really, really do.